Hi, this is Redline TV, and it's really great today because we've got somebody I think it's really important for us to hear from. I think she's got lots of very interesting perspectives and insights on an awful lot of things. Her name is Heather Mendick, and she's actually billed as a sort of freelance academic and researcher. What I know about her is that she's a pretty full-time activist, actually, but her kind of special focus in terms of that is equality, education, science, maths, that kind of thing. What makes her interesting in terms of the politics of it is Heather is Jewish, and she was also Corbyn's community liaison person. So she was a bit on the inside of what was going on there. But she was also expelled from the Labour Party in 2022. I mean, we may touch on that, we may not. It might be that we see that that's so boring now, like
Yeah.
now everybody's being expelled. It really doesn't matter. But she's a major person on Twitter. Go and check it out. She has her own YouTube channel. And if you want to really think about what's been happening in the last few years, you should have a dive into it because I certainly do. Heather was very active in her own local Labour Party, which is Hackney South. And I think the MP is Meg Hillier there. But she remains active kind of nationally and locally. So I'm going to start with the local, then we're going to get a bit sort of international and national, and then we're going to come back to the local. So I'm going to start, Heather, with can you describe Hackney for those people who are going to be listening to this, don't know it, and why it might be an interesting thing for us to think about what's going on in Hackney.
So Hackney is where I live. It's actually where I was born. I was born in the Mother's Hospital, which now is housing, because a lot of things in Hackney are becoming housing, like across a lot of London and increasingly other cities and places across the UK. Um, I have been back in Hackney since 2008. It's split into two. So people might be surprised to hear you say that Meg Hillier is the MP, because hardly anyone's heard of Meg Hillier in my
Yeah.
experience. And most people, when they think of Labour and Hackney and MPs, they think of Diane Abbott. But Hackney's got two constituencies, Hackney North with Diane Abbott and Hackney South. Well, technically, Hackney North and Stoke Newington, Hackney South and Shoreditch with Meg Hillier. Very different politically. Meg is kind of standard issue. Um, Generic centrist Labour MP. She's only ever broken the whip once or twice, both times, or once or whichever it was, once or twice, it was on Brexit. She would not vote to trigger Article, was it 50?
Can't
Such a
remember. Too
long
long
time ago.
ago. Article, whatever it was.
Yeah. Like a lot of places, Hackney had a massive boost in the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. So I think we got up to across the two CLPs 8,000 members under Jeremy Corbyn. I don't know what it is now. The left had control of both Hackney South and Hackney North, has control of neither now. Um, and I think they're interesting. I mean, this Labour Party is so local. I mean, we talk about it nationally, we focus on Keir Starmer, but it's so different in different areas. And there's a lot of areas where they become kind of careerist because there's a kind of nice, safe route into politics. There's a disturbing number of people who become councillors in Hackney, then go on to become MPs. We've got two by-elections happening in May locally because two of our councillors are going to be going for, in one case, a safe Labour seat, in another case, potentially, a good chance of becoming a Labour seat. It is seen as a kind of route into careers. When Sadiq Khan became mayor, he picked up two Labour councillors into his cabinet. It is so it becomes a kind of battleground. So I
Yeah.
think the battlegrounds that were happening everywhere become more intense when there's people's careers at stake. Um,
But don't
because,
you think what's
yeah,
also happened, I mean, is that kind of when when the kind of I even hate to call it the Corbynites. I never saw myself as a Corbynite.
right.
But when the left had more voice in what was going on, there was actually some kind of diversity of candidates. And everywhere I look at now, I mean, in
Yeah.
Lewisham, the mayor has now become an MP. It's like, you know, the professionalization of politics. And with that professionalization, I think has happened this squeeze on democracy. I
Yeah.
think anyone who thinks there's democracy in the Labour Party.
Well, it's not really democracy anywhere, right? This is not our problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I
Yeah.
agree with that. But, you know, there was always a kind of relative democracy.
Which did happen, I think, a little bit and not enough under the left leadership in Hackney, was we started reaching out and connecting to other politics.
Yes.
And that since the left has collapsed, some people like me have gone more into that. So
Yeah.
we were much more likely to stand on picket lines under left leadership than people are now in
But
Labour Party.
they've made a virtue of that, haven't they? Because
Yeah.
actually they've kind of said, well, we're serious politicians.
Yeah.
The thing that serious politicians don't do is get politically involved locally. I don't know what they do, but they don't get like involved in any actual politics on the ground. You get
Yeah.
the feeling now that what they mean by politics is just what happens in Westminster. And just what happens with a few people in Westminster as well.
Yeah, but obviously you've then got these like right wing or Starmerite, whatever you want to call them, just mainstream Labour people who are councillors who
Yes.
can't say that, who have to then make the local politics. So in Hackney, the mayor would stand on picket lines. Not some, not others. Obviously, when there's strikes against the council, it was like they would be very resistant and very negative. But yeah, there wasn't really a sense of the Labour Party doing that. There was a sense that we were supposed to defer our politics to them.
Uh-huh.
Um, I think so. We were supposed to canvass for them,
Yeah.
campaign for them to get them elected, but not
Yes.
then supposed to have our own autonomous politics,
Yeah.
where we might have support a housing campaign, which wasn't so friendly to the council. Like there's a
Yeah.
Save Ridley Road campaign. People
Yes.
may know Ridley Road Market because it has a national kind of status because it's had a TV show about it. And there's a Save Ridley Road campaign, which is very anti-gentrification. And the Green councillor has a much more of a, well, both the Green councillors we have a much more kind of grassroots approach, much more fluid, even than our Labour left councillors. I noticed that Labour left councillors also had a little bit of a defer to us of you should select, once you've selected us, support, you need to support us because we're fighting this hard fight within the party.
Yeah.
But we're not, they didn't see it as their job to then help our campaigns in
No.
the Greens
It's
did.
an interesting
Yeah.
disconnect really between, you know, the people and those who are supposed to represent them. Can I just bring us back to
Yeah.
Hackney just for a minute? Because what I find interesting about Hackney, because my partner used to live in Hackney, as you may well know.
Yeah.
And it's very different. Those of you who don't know London, London is a series of villages, and Hackney is a very different village to the village I live in. And you've got in Hackney a sizable and visible Jewish community, don't you?
Yeah.
As well as a sizable and visible Muslim community and a sort of sizable and visible sort of white hip community as
Yeah.
well. And then, you know, I don't really mean it like this, but kind of ordinary people as well. So sort of that level of what we would call diversity, which I think is a questionable a thing anyway. How has the Gaza, Israel, Palestine issue been playing out on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting because I do think, like, talking to other people, I do think there's places where the demonstrations, the local demonstrations have been mostly Muslim or Muslim led, and that hasn't been the case in Hackney. They've been really diverse. They very much look like Hackney. So Hackney is about, I think it's about 50% minoritized communities.
Yeah,
And so as well as the ones you said, very big Turkish Kurdish community, big African and Caribbean
yeah,
communities, and quite a big Latin American community actually
yeah,
here. And interestingly, one of the councillors, will come on to this, one of the councillors who broke the whip to vote differently on, you know, vote to debate a ceasefire in council is the one Latin American councillor. Um, and, and and so yeah, it has been, and it's very young. Hackney is an incredibly young borough. I can't remember, it's again something like 50% of people are under 30 or something,
Yeah.
which speaks to a little bit of like that hip community coming in, which
Yeah.
is largely white, but not entirely white, also quite diverse, but class-wise less. There's a real difference. So you've got the class split as well in Hackney and the kind of gentrification issue and the way that plays into it. But yeah, it's the council has been the real problem for us. Like the council frame Gaza as a issue of community cohesion. And so as far as for them, they really struggled with the whole idea of having a ceasefire motion, Hackney Labour, because it's like, we should not even be talking about this. This is not an issue for local councils. We only deal with it in the way it affects us. And it affects us that maybe people have lost family, maybe people have connections there, have feelings about that area, have relationships to that area. And because of that, then there's issues of coherence between communities. And the implication is that it's a kind of Muslim versus Jewish issue, which is a real problem because obviously lots of Jewish people like me who are working with lots of activists in the Muslim community and with people who have no faith at all. I don't have a faith. I have a ethnicity, I suppose, as Jewish.
Mm.
Um, and people from there's a lot of Christians involved in the solidarity movement here. And there's a lot of people who are, there really is generally just a lot of kind of people who believe this. And the demonstrations, even people who don't go on demonstrations, you hear conversations, you hear people engage with the issue. We do a lot of kind of leafleting. And Hackney is so supportive of Palestine.
Yeah.
You'd expect. I mean, I remember like early on, I went into a bookshop to get a book called Minor Detail, which is a really good uh, novel about Palestine, about the struggle. And they were sold out and they were like ordering loads in, and it was the most ordered book in this little bookshop in Hackney that week because people were really wanting to know and were really engaging and still are with the issues. And so the real community cohesion issue, the real divisions, is between our council and pretty much everyone else.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think it's the kind of what I call the political class and the media class are kind of desperate to cite this as a Jewish Muslim thing that's going on, because in a way it helps them make invisible the fact that the majority of people in the UK are now saying that's enough.
Yeah.
We want a ceasefire. And they're pretending it's like, I can't hear that. You know, when kids stick
Yeah.
their fingers in their ear and they go, I can't hear it. And it's almost as if I feel we have got to the point where our representatives, our political representatives, no longer see it as their duty to in any way represent the feeling of the people who've represented them.
So yeah, maybe they never did, and maybe we just didn't see it so starkly. Like this issue more than anything else, like really for me shows that massive gap there is at all levels because I mean, people felt the gap with local councils before because of issues around housing, particularly. Housing is such a big issue here with so many thousands and thousands of families in temporary accommodation and people just struggling to get, even if people have social housing, struggling to get repairs done, when people don't, struggling to get anywhere to live, the private rented sector going off the scale. So people felt that before, people are being forced to move away. And sometimes when we were leafleting, we would meet people who grew up in Hackney, want to live in Hackney, but come back to Hackney on Saturdays because all their life is here. But they're young guys and they've had to move out
Yeah.
miles and miles away. So that gap has been there. And the one thing when I was canvassing for the Greens last winter, and one thing I could always say to people was, Labour take us for granted. Because
Yeah.
that is just a resonates across Hackney. I would say 8 or 9 out of 10 people they would just look at you with a recognition in their eyes or smile at you and say or agree. And it was remarkable. But this seems to have really increased that sense. And it's so dramatic, I mean, it is most dramatic with the Muslim community, but it goes across.
Yeah, but they are going to vote Labour, are they? Question mark. I
So
mean, I get the
yeah,
feeling. I don't know about you. I mean, my
yeah.
area in Lewisham is like a bit like yours. It's 50% minoritized, not the same balance in terms of the minorities. It's mostly African Caribbean around here. Mostly that's, a lot of Eastern European and a lot of, other people and Africans, but mostly that. But I get the feeling that around here, what's going to happen is that a lot of people are not going to vote, and a lot of people are just not knowing when to vote. So when they get a pollster saying, "What are you going to vote?" they'll say Labour because it's almost we just don't, we need the Tories to be out. But it's like Labour have lost the hearts and interests of the people. They might vote Labour, but with no interest, is what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I felt that. So the best barometer we've had in Hackney was the mayoral election. We had a by-election for mayor, because we had a scandal here, and he was forced to resign, and that was in November, early November, and that was interesting because doing doorstep, there were people who were, saying that Labour had lost their heart. But when I talked to some of them afterwards, not all of them had voted Labour against, some of them had, because it's kind of hard not to. But there was a very significant swing against Labour towards the Greens.
Ah,
So I think Labour went down from around 60% last time to just under half.
ah.
First time I think they've got under half in the citywide, I mean, a borough-wide in Hackney for maybe a couple of decades, something like that. And the Greens went up. I can't remember now. I didn't know, but a definite. I mean, basically, that vote mostly went to the Greens. Now it was very low turnout because it's a by-election, but it did suggest that something was shifting. It was a month into the genocide. That was an issue. It did definitely swing some votes.
And I hear today, by the way, that an independent has got into Newham, and the Labour vote has gone down by 27%. And I think we're going to see this happening over the general election. I mean, I think there will be certain areas which will go against the national swing, and they'll be very much in the urban areas and very much where there is a strong independent representation going, and those people have had their roots, many of them originally in the Labour Party,
Yeah.
and they've been treated appallingly. And thinking about that, I want to kind of shift us on a little bit.
Yeah, I think Newham's a bit of an exception. And Newham, Tower
Okay.
Hamlets, Liverpool, there are
Yeah,
places where that will happen. But
exactly.
in Hackney, it's not happening, and none
Yeah.
of the left councillors are going to be leaving, as far as I can tell. I've tried really hard to convince them, and they're not
Why
convincible.
won't they? Okay,
Yeah.
why won't they? What's their shtick? What is it?
I mean, this would mean psychoanalyzing these people. I'm not sure I'm qualified to do. Um, but most councillors haven't left. Most of the left councillors are sticking
Yeah,
out. And I think it is because it is really hard to win as independent most places. In
it is.
Hackney, the independents do shit. There have been independent candidates, mostly running on anti low traffic neighborhood ticket, but also a kind of like generally pissed off with the council ticket, and it just did terrible. There isn't really left candidates like Trade Union Socialist Coalition also do terrible.
Yeah.
It's hard most places. I think people do care about being a councillor. They do care
Yeah,
something
and
that's
do
good,
you
yeah.
not think this is in some way a reflection also about what's going on in the Parliamentary Labour Party? That we have the so-called, socialist group of MPs who've basically done nothing.
Yeah.
And they did nothing at the beginning because it was like, we've got to give him a chance. When, many of us were going, this is awful. You need to start now because otherwise you're buggered. And then it went on, and they've just got, if anything, quieter and quieter and quieter. I don't know what they're waiting for.
Yeah. I mean, they needed to have a red line issue. This is very appropriate for what I do. And they didn't have something that was not crossable, right? I mean, even if they said we give them a chance, it needed to be an agreed point at which they stopped doing that. I also don't really get the ones who've been deselected. Like why they're not just like, fuck it, I can do what I want now.
Okay, well, let's talk about the ones that have been deselected then.
Yeah. Why aren't they doing something?
Why aren't they doing something?
Yeah. I mean, they must have. I mean, I guess to become a Labour MP, you have to tie yourself to the party. And to become a Labour council, your identity is connected to it in some way, right?
You're trying to analyze them again.
Yeah. I mean, what else can you do? I mean, this is hard
You
to
think
know.
that? Do you think this is a sign of mental illness?
Well, psychoanalysis is not just about mental illness, it's just about understanding, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't think it's a sign of it. I think it's,
sure.
well, maybe we're the mentally ill ones.
Yeah,
But
yeah. So
yeah.
they tell me. They tell me I'm nuts all the time. Can we just,
Yeah.
thinking about some of this, and I know we've now kind of gone off and off a bit, but thinking about two people who are around in your area that people are really interested in. Let's start with Diane Abbott. Now, I think her situation going forward is actually quite complicated. And I think it's complicated because, it's obvious for a while she's not been feeling very well.
Yeah.
She's really not well. But it was also that wonderful explosion, for me, explosion of the Black female voice that came out when she was treated in that derisory manner. And you just have this feeling that there is somewhere there is a lot of anger building up. And I mean, I can't speak for them. Well, I can speak a bit for the Muslim community because I have Muslim people that I speak to. But, we're seeing it in the Muslim community.
Yeah.
It's beginning to bubble in the Black community. And it's even come out in the Black newspapers like The Voice. What doesn't happen, of course, and I know we've touched on this when we've had personal conversations, is nobody seems to care very much what Black people think.
Well, yeah, I mean,
In terms of the
yeah.
newspapers and the news, nobody says, Keir Starmer was put on the spot today by a group representing Black voters who said, we're on the bottom of the pile. Nobody does that, do they?
No, well, the thing is that the media basically is following the establishment. They're fine with, I mean, Trevor Phillips, they're very interested in what he has to say. So it's not like they don't care about all Black voices. It's just well, I mean, Hackney, it's interesting because there's definitely a very strong Black voice and it's come out in other areas. I mean, Child Q, the young woman a school student who was strip searched by police. Uh,
Shocking.
really shocking. And
Yeah.
The Space, which is a charity that caters to Black survivors of domestic violence, had a run-in with the council, and there was again a lot of demonstrations around that. So there's a kind of history of these demonstrations that goes way back and way beyond what I'm talking
Yeah.
about and way beyond my experience.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very much that clearly the narratives of it's Diane Abbott, where she's coming from, she's not coming from an establishment position. Um, she's she's not seen as respectable. She's not seen as someone who has a right to speak, and that goes for anyone who supports her, aligns with her.
But I
Um,
think Black
yeah,
women have that. I mean,
yeah,
I'm saying this from personal experience.
yeah,
Um, and that doesn't mean I don't think I've never made a mistake. I'm quite happy to admit that I've said things that I would pose in different ways now. But Black women are never allowed to make a mistake. I mean,
yeah,
the example I'm thinking of with Diane Abbott was that ridiculous thing of her drinking a
yeah.
can on the train and the other stuff about when she was talking about figures. And lots of those white male politicians mess up their figures. Everyone goes, oh, well, but a Black woman is never allowed to make a mistake.
Well, for all of us, there's kind of stories which precede us, right? There's narratives that we fit into. There's narratives about Black women, which make certain things possible and impossible. And there are narratives about white men, which make certain things possible and impossible. And those are very different narratives.
Yeah.
So you're not seeing someone, when you look at someone, you're not seeing them as just this individual, you're seeing them with all these kind of stories on top of them that precede them. And yeah, the stories, that precede black women, that black women get written into, and inevitably, yeah, they silence people, and I mean, it's very clear with Palestine that stories we have about Palestinians are stories we have about Israelis. Jewish Israelis are very different stories, and again, give people different rights to speak and to be heard and to be treated differently. So I think it is just all those kind of racialized narratives that we have across society,
Yeah.
and gendered narratives that we have across society as well. Yeah, and the ways connect. Yeah.
So I mean, you're a white Jew. I mean, you're a white Jew. I'm a black Jew. What do you think? How do you think you're responded to? What's been your experience of how other white Jews respond to you? Because you're on the left, you're a Corbyn supporter. I mean, you and I know
Yeah.
that Corbyn was surrounded by a whole load of Jewish people who advised and were his supporters and stuff like that. I mean, but how has that been for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I know my experience is very specific because I've talked to other people who've had really different experiences. Like people who don't know me, who are responding to me on Twitter, um, and people who know me but are very, very know me politically, very negative, like really not valuing my views. I've been in,
Yeah.
Labour Party meeting where we were debating a motion about the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, going way back to that summer where it was being contested, so early that summer. And then there was a guy who stood up after I'd spoken, and another Jewish member on the left had spoken. No, it was after one Jewish member on the left had spoken, and he said, told us how Jewish people feel. And I spoke.
He was a non-Jew, and
He
he
was
was
non-Jew,
saying,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And then I spoke, and so it's like you just can't see us. It's like we're invisible, and you've got Jewish people in this room, and so that. But then the people I've known, or for decades, people who I went to university with, people who I've been, maybe if I've lost touch even, but people was friends with, or am friends with, really different. People will still listen to me because they don't see me as this person who's become trouble and is trouble. They see me as the earlier version of myself. And that's been really, again, I don't see them that often, but the times we have seen them, which are usually kind of quite serious times, like, someone's died and then you suddenly get together with these people who
yeah.
feel connected into the same person. So you have a stone setting or you have a funeral. I've been really felt really reassured that people will still have these discussions with me.
Mm.
And I don't think that's everyone's experience. I know people who have had people refuse to speak to them.
Yep, definitely.
And I've not had that. I don't know what
Yeah,
it is about just the kind of conversations I've had with them in the past, the kind
yeah.
of memories they have of me and connections they have with me, the fact that we're in a funeral or stone setting, and what you're going to do, start having a full-on political row where you say
Oh,
you're
who
going to talk to
knows?
someone. I mean, maybe that's just not what they would do. So I think there I have been able to have some conversations across difference.
So it's a kind of, it strikes me that in a way what's happening both in the Jewish community, whatever that means, and the Black community is that there is the accepted and acceptable Jewish voice, which can be heard in certain forums, and the accepted and acceptable Black voice, which is also allowed to be accepted. But outside of those realms, it's kind of not really heard at all, is it?
I agree. And I think the difference, a major difference, is just how much of the Jewish community is acceptable versus unacceptable compared to how much of the Black community. I think it splits rather differently. And also just how incredibly, yeah, and that split makes the Jewish community much more useful to the establishment.
Exactly. And that is the point. It's a point of how useful you are to the establishment. And I'm afraid, comparatively, Blacks are no use.
No, yeah, and clearly the Jewish establishment organizations. I mean, you mentioned The Voice. There
Yeah.
is the Jewish newspaper. There isn't a Jewish newspaper that's equivalent to The Voice in terms of where it sits in relation to those challenging the establishment narratives. The Jewish newspapers uniformly presented a anti-left, anti-Corbyn,
Yeah.
I mean, the pro-Israel, but pro-Israel is because it fits into the kind of the American imperialist politics more generally, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a very nice match, whereas with the Voice it isn't.
But I'm really interested in this conversation, and what I'm interested in is because, me and my partner, who's also Jewish, we've been talking about this a lot, and I've been talking to a lot of other Jewish people about this. What do you think the cost is for Jews for being so identified with the establishment? Is there a cost? Sorry, that was a closed question.
Yeah,
I'll open
yeah.
it.
It's a really, I don't know, it's a really hard question, right? I mean,
Mm,
because actually life is a lot easier when you're aligned with the establishment, just
yeah,
generally, right? Um, like it is. So I think sometimes like it's a weird thing that both of us have had this, that you have to become like almost more famous for being anti-Semitic than for anything else in your life. And that's a weird thing to have to confront and
it
live
is.
with. And most people aren't going to want to do that. And it was kind of nice you mentioned the fact that I'm also a researcher who does stuff about science education and equity issues
Well,
and all
that's
that.
because that's what happens to me.
Yeah.
Nobody mentions that I've
Yeah.
written a book and that I was an
Yeah.
anti-racist trainer or anything of
Yeah.
those, you
You
know.
just become this person who gets called
Yeah,
out capo,
yeah, yeah,
self-hating, whatever
yeah,
it is.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And yeah, most people are not going to want to do that. And so obviously aligning with the establishment in different ways. So there are different levels. There is of aligning with the establishment, right? There
yeah,
isn't just that I'm on one side or the other. People have complicated positions.
yes.
And I remember like I had a kind of thing where I was trying to understand Owen Jones's position for a while. So I read his book on the establishment.
Yeah,
Um, and he has some really interesting examples in there because he worked for John McDonnell.
I know.
But he doesn't mention John McDonnell as an anti-establishment figure. He mentions the I think three Labour politicians. One of them is Angela Eagle. Um, one of them is my awful guy, Chris someone. Terrible, terrible bloke. Can't remember his next surname.
There's a
Anyway,
lot of them called Chris.
yeah, there is. Anyway, he mentions people who are in lots of ways very much on the side of the establishment. But of course they had run-ins with different bits of the establishment. People do.
Yes.
And so yeah, but it's clearly not pushing obstinately against all things, not forcing your voice the way that we do is clearly an easier route. So I don't think there's obviously gains, it isn't costs. But what's it mean for the Jewish community?
But do you not think that there is a cost as being seen in support of Israel then as a community? Because that doesn't happen to any other group.
Yeah,
There are English, white, Christian people who are in support of Israel, but they're not seen in the same way, are they? Because of the
yeah.
way that Jews have been used to almost, well, not almost, to kind of give a moral mission to all sorts of distasteful actions.
Yeah. I mean, the person you need to talk to about this is Tony Lerman. He's the one I would say really
For
has
sure.
thought
And
this through.
anyone who doesn't know him,
Yeah,
just Google him and have a look and
yeah,
get hold of the video because um, uh, you actually did an interview with him as
yeah,
well.
I
He's
did.
a
Yeah,
really, really interesting guy, and he's a kind of crossover guy in a way as well,
yeah.
isn't he?
Well, his first book is The Making and Unmaking of a Zionist, and
Yes,
it's probably I've read different accounts of people's transition between because a lot of us who grew up in the Jewish community grew up as Zionists because
of
it's
course,
taken for granted,
of course.
um, I think his is a really good account of that transition and also the cost for him that he got handed out of a job that he liked. He got handed out of a community that he was a big part of. He was a central figure in the Jewish community. He wrote columns for the Jewish Chronicle.
Yeah.
He
Wow.
headed up one of the major organizations within the kind of
Yeah.
Jewish
Yeah.
establishment in this country. He had links across the world on the basis
Yes.
of the work that he did. Um, and so he had to lose that. And he would talk about, one of the reasons why he got pushed in the way he did, or his rationale for this, his understanding of it, is that he started talking about the cost for Jews of being linked to Israel.
Yeah.
And there are Jews who are very much part of the community who've written in Jewish publications about that cost, about, well, actually, yes, anti-Semitism will go up because of that.
Yeah.
Because when people link Jewishness to brutality, to violence,
Genocide.
yeah, now to genocide, and
Yes.
previously to
Yes.
human rights abuses, to
Yeah.
occupation, then will people will get negative associations. People will see Jews differently, and that's a really difficult thing to talk about, because you then get into the, well, are you saying that Jews are responsible for their own oppression? And it's not at all what either Tony or I are saying.
Yeah.
Um, but there is a kind of root there, and it's something that he just said we should talk about this. We should talk about whether Jews in the diaspora, so Jews outside Israel, should not have such close links,
Yeah.
have more distance. And that was not a sayable thing in this.
But it's very disciplined, isn't it? Because if you come out, I mean, I know this because of my relationship with JVL and just talking to people in, sorry, Jewish Voice for Labour, how many of them have been, spat at in the street. No, it's really interesting. I often wonder whether the Community Security Trust keeps records of attacks on Jews in this way, but they don't, do they? Because I know people who've been spat at in the street, who've been insulted, who've lost work, who've lost associations, who can't any longer go to their local choir, who find it difficult to walk down the street, whose children have been troubled because of the political stance that they have voiced. And these are not extremists. These are not people like you and me who, for whatever reason, have got a high profile. These are just ordinary people who just want to go, no. And I very much remember something just before I was expelled from the Labour Party. No, just after. And I went to India. And these two people came over to me and said, "You're Jackie Walker." And of course I went, oh, it was like,
That
I
is
went
weird.
to India
That's
so
really
that
weird.
nobody would say this is Jackie Walker. And they were Jewish people.
Right.
And they were very much from the Manchester community. So that, and we actually met for dinner all the time they were in the resort. It was delightful. Me and her went shopping. We did all that. We talked about it. And she said, "Oh, I'll see you when we get back." I said, "We won't, because you won't be able to." And she said, "Oh, no, no, it's not like that. It'll be fine. And sure enough, of course, what happened was that she found she wasn't able to. And she couldn't even keep if you like, a kind of social contact with me in any way. Because as what you and I know, this stuff is heavily policed. And there are many Jews, I think, who stay silent rather than say anything.
Yeah. And there's also Jews who, like, if you're Jewish, then obviously anti-Semitism is something you've thought a lot about. And so there are times when anti-Semitism comes up, when you want to have a say about it, and you want
Yeah.
to talk about it in an honest way, you want to talk about your experience, and that's a good faith position. It's just in a bad faith debate, it's not possible.
Yeah. And
It's the problem. Yeah.
it's all bad faith debates at the
Yeah.
moment. I
Yeah. That's
feel
it.
being trapped into all these bad faith debates. And there is a link somewhere here, and I'm going to move us on to something else, which is what's happening to the kind of dialogue around international law and human rights. Because I don't know about you, I mean, yeah, of course, seeing the corpses of, babies, women, men horribly mutilated, seeing the bodies of people starving is an awful, awful thing. But one thing that has made me also want to despair is the way that what's happened between Israel and Palestinians, Israel and the international community, feels to me like it's destroyed a particular moral project, and that that we don't know where we're at now. And that kind of brings us around a bit to what's just occurred in a funny way with the Iranian embassy having been bombed, and now what's seen as a vicious attack on Israel. Nobody seems to want to mention too much the fact that the attack happened in Syria on what's basically Iranian soil. And it's like there is no more a world order. And I was training some people from Africa, some feminists from Africa quite recently. And most people don't realize this because they don't hear it. A lot of Africa, China, a lot of South America are not with Europe. They're not with Euro-America. Somebody posted today, it was a supporter of Israel, and they were talking about the attacks, and they said, Israel, Euro-America. No, he didn't. He said, the world is standing with you. And I said, no, the world is not standing with you. The leaders of Euro-America are standing with you. And it's almost like everything that in my head we were moving towards in terms of a world order has been set back.
Okay, there's a lot in what you just said. So
I know, sorry.
Because that's right. I'm just like thinking it through. I'm not sure I was so convinced we were moving towards that world order. So it hasn't been as disruptive for
See,
me.
I'm an optimist, obviously.
Yeah. So I'm not really a believer in progress in that sense.
Yeah.
Like I do find that I'm often thinking with all sorts of issues that I've been a feminist for a long time. I grapple with, are things getting better or not?
Yeah.
I clearly don't want to go back to when women couldn't work, but it's not simple for me to say, well, things are definitely better now when I look at certain ways about
Sure.
how,
How women are made to work by the kind of economic,
but also the really, really vicious and
yeah,
misogynistic stuff that's coming
yeah,
out. People
terrible.
like Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate,
Yeah.
and the way that rape is basically unprosecutable in this country, that Andrew Tate could not even be taken to court for that.
Yeah.
And that when the accusations against Russell Brand came out, which were really plausible, the number of people on the left who were arguing with me about why did they take so long, it seemed like we'd gone backwards in understanding of rape when I thought about Sue Lees's documentary on rape that was on TV, which showed up the problems with the police investigations. And then there was all this change, and it just isn't there anymore. And so every issue, that's the one I've thought about the most, I think, because I've taught gender in university quite a lot. But on every issue, I feel like we haven't got a narrative of progress. I've always had a problem with human rights. Kehinde Andrews' book, really good. I read that.
Yeah, I read that.
Yeah,
So,
that's
okay,
very
let me
good, isn't it? On the
reframe.
flaws, but just to say that's great. People should read that. Incredible on the way in which human rights have become a framework, which is used to basically push an imperialist agenda to present certain countries as lacking in relation to gay rights, for example.
But they can't do that. What I'm saying is, with this that's happened, they've lost the ability to do that, I think, anymore. I think Euro-America have lost the moral credibility to point the finger.
That's good, right? That's a form of progress.
Yeah. And so that's why I was saying maybe I should reframe what it is that I'm saying, because that's good. But the problem is, what is there that's coming to replace that? If we don't even have the fantasy of a moral order, what do we have?
So, okay, so a couple of things. Like, it's not good to have a fantasy of a moral order. It's good that's not a good thing. So it's fine that we've lost that. I think what's good to have is a realistic idea of what a moral order can do and can't do. There is an attempt to construct a moral order through human rights international law, and that has had some effects.
Yeah.
The ICJ, you can't get an American politician to say fuck all against Israel, but you can get an American ICJ judge to line up with the others, because law is different. It has a different framework, and it has been able to achieve certain things. And the insistence on it by anyone, the United Nations speakers, by the debaters, like people like Norman Finkelstein, the use of it has a real hold on people. People want it, and people want it to be real. And so I think that is good. I think of human rights not as something that is an order that we have, but as something that we can choose to want to try and create, that we can choose to use strategically. I think that's happening more than it ever has before. It's not something we're paying lip service to. It's something people, and you can see it in people's TikTok videos, you can see it in people struggling to say, well, that the bombing of the consulate, that was against international law. So can we use, and young people are seeing that very much. So
and that's wonderful,
that's very
isn't
good.
it?
Yeah.
And the fact that that is being taken hold of, if you like, by the general sort of population. And then we come back to this thing of this gap between the electorate and those who rule us.
Yes.
I mean, that gap is just getting wider and wider and wider.
Yes. But it's getting more and more visible. So I would say it was wide in 2019 general election, but it wasn't visible because most people didn't vote for Jeremy Corbyn because we lost. The gap wasn't visible then. The gap is really visible now. And more people are having a problem with it, trying to do something. I mean, I'm not particularly optimistic or hopeful person. I actually saw a film yesterday, it's a great film. We can put a link in the description. But the one thing which is an old kind of Spanish film, they were talking about getting old, and they said the way to grow old respectfully is without fear and without hope. And I certainly can see that as you kind of go through these cycles in your life of like trying things and it doesn't happen, and there's a way in which hope gets kind of battered out of you. So I'm not a particularly hopeful person at the moment, but I do see some hope in the kind of massive uprising, massive resistance that keeps springing up everywhere.
Wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah, it is wonderful. And it's
the marches have been, I mean, I think the most powerful thing that has happened recently has been those regular mass marches, not just in urban centres either. They have been across the provinces, and they've not just been in this country, they have been global.
Yeah.
And that is a really positive thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And everywhere I look in Hackney, if I go for a walk in Hackney, I see graffiti, Free Palestine. The council would love to rub it all off, but they can't keep up. There are murals in Hackney. People are creating amazing.
They can't keep us down.
They can't. There's a mural in Hackney that was painted. It was the council painted over it. I think they painted it 3 times. It is just unstoppable. And I think there's something, and obviously there's always a way in which electoral politics tends to take the energy out of it. And it will be really interesting. We've got general election in this country, we've got general election in the United States. Apart from Germany, I think we're the 2 countries that have been the most supportive of Israel, the US and UK. So seeing if that gap plays out in electoral politics, I don't know whether it will, but that will be interesting, and seeing whether people go and canvass or whether people stay with the movement stuff, how those two juxtapose. The people going around and talking to Labour canvassers and taking videos of that, I think that's really interesting.
Isn't it? I am waiting for my Labour canvasser to come to my door. They won't, because I've got a Palestinian flag up. So I'm pretty sure it's a bit like, Dracula, you put the onions out.
Yeah. Got it. Not an onion.
If you put the Palestinian flag out, they won't call, guys. You'll be all right.
Well, I think they won't call on me just because they know my name. I was a local Labour Party secretary. There's one council who might, because I'm friends with him, and so he's not threatened by having a chat with me, but some of them are. They also know how I'm going to vote, I guess.
Exactly.
But you're right. But there's a lot of people. I mean, this is the thing, it's not just us. A lot of times I feel like it's just us. It's just the left. And the left can be bigger or smaller at different times and get more people involved. But this has gone way beyond that.
It is.
Yeah, that's really strong.
And it's just wonderful, isn't it? And it really gives you the sense with other issues that are going to come up, because in my head, there's also a whole load of other things that are coming up, like the whole way that we organize kind of global power. You've got what's happening between China and Russia and the Africans, you know, and all
Yeah.
that change that's going on. You've also got the issue about what's happening with the weather and global warming. And anybody who's been listening to the farming news this week, because I do that kind of thing, it's a great news program, actually, should be terrified about what's about to happen to food prices because of the unprecedented rain we've had. And this is just the start of those things. So that you're right, you know, you get the sense of there is a kind of building, and also a building of kind of anger
Yeah.
about the lack of response.
Yeah.
So we are going to have to kind of come to an end on it, although I found it absolutely delightful. I've just thrown my notes away there like that.
Yeah,
I
no,
just
I've got rid
like
of the
that.
notes. But I think making the notes helps, right? Making the notes.
Yeah, making the notes helps, but throwing them away is also very handy. Where are we going in terms of, let's just bring it back to Hackney, because we said that's what we would
Yeah.
do. We've gone everywhere.
Yeah.
We've talked about, you know, international democracy, protest, you know, the people, what's happening in Hackney, and where would you think this leaves them?
So in terms of Hackney on Gaza, we've had like three things we've been trying to do. One is to get them to support a ceasefire.
Yeah.
And because we got two Green councillors, we could get a motion on ceasefire. Labour attempted to block it. And that was where some of the Labour councillors rebelled and voted with the Greens in an attempt to get a discussion. That I think at least made Labour next meeting say, yeah, we'll debate it. So they debated the motion. Labour took out the bits which were good, but there still is at least the principle that a ceasefire motion could get passed. The other two things are more
So hold
substantial.
on, let's just say that that's interesting, isn't it? Because that just shows how the fissures in terms of local politics can work. And you
Yes.
know, if it can work in Hackney, it can work elsewhere as well.
Yeah. So two fissures is one, the move away from Corbyn meant more support for the Greens and also the hard work of the Greens got a couple of councillors elected. Another
Yeah.
fissure was the left in the Labour Party managed to get a few more left councillors selected. And so they were slightly stronger. They worked together a bit more. Some of them broke with it. And actually a couple of them who weren't part of the organised left lined up a little bit with it, not fully. So then that does make something else possible, I agree. The other two things are much harder because they involve like substantive policy shifts. So one is that Hackney's twinned with Haifa, which is kind of shocking.
It is shocking.
Yeah.
For people, can you just say something about Haifa for people who don't know about Haifa?
So Haifa is in within the borders of Israel or 48 Palestine or and it is a fairly kind of mixed city in terms of having Jewish and Palestinian Israelis there, but it was a city which was Palestinian before 1948. And in the Nakba, the catastrophe around the founding of Israel, when Palestinians were expelled, that city was cleared. So there were some who stayed, but not many.
Yeah.
And so it is a site of, it's true that it's a site of quite a lot of resistance to what's going on, more than many other cities. But of course, it's still inside an apartheid state. The twinning is still with the local government there. And so in terms of a boycott and divestment and sanctions approach, it should be stopped. The other thing is the investments that Hackney has in companies that are complicit in Israel's occupation, in the genocide in Gaza, and all of that through the pension fund, which is a kind of common issue across a lot of London.
Well, I think it was,
Country, actually, not just London, across all local authorities.
Yeah, I don't know if you caught this, but Sadiq Khan was interviewed and brought this up. And I just thought, what an extraordinary thing to say, because I was involved with the struggle against apartheid because I was working for the Southwest African People's Organization, which was like the ANC really at the time, you know, and backing the boycott situation there. And Sadiq Khan was basically saying, no, this is no good. It doesn't help anyone. It certainly doesn't help, that old
Yeah.
argument. And, so, and I just thought to myself, why didn't the interviewer say, so they can't resist in any way in armed struggle, they can't resist in civil struggle, and you don't want them to do BDS. How's change going to happen? Nobody
Yeah.
actually poses it in that way. And I actually think for people who don't understand why boycotts are important, they're also important because what it does is it keeps the issue live for us. We feel we can go in and do something. It raises awareness of the fact that we're buying products from settlements, from stolen land.
Yeah.
And so it's if
It's
you like,
political education as well. A lot of it.
exactly, it's a
But
political
also,
education.
all of these people understood the importance of boycott, divestment, and sanctions when it came to Russia
Yeah.
very recently. And
Yeah,
so,
they didn't
so
say the
Hackney
same. Oh
Council.
no,
So,
it might harm the Russians. We mustn't do
yeah,
that.
and there's actually a much the BDS movement is a much more sophisticated movement than the kind of boycott, divestment, sanctions used against Russia, which are more likely to affect ordinary people. It's very there's So, for example, you don't have to not watch Israeli TV or films. You're not going to boycott a screening of Israeli film, but you're going to boycott a screening if it's got government support, Israeli government support.
Yeah,
That's an important distinction,
yeah,
which is not made in relation to Russia. So yeah, I agree, but also I think there's a lot of disingenuous shit going
yeah,
around that as
yeah,
well. So these issues. So we had before October 7th, we'd put in. I hate saying October 7th because it's American. 7th of October, we'd put in uh, a what's it called? A deputation where you say we'd like to come up and talk to you,
yeah.
and kind of delayed it. But then they started postponing it on grounds of 7th of October had happened, and they couldn't just listen to one side asking for divestment. They had to listen to the other side, which says, no, you should keep your investments in apartheid states and occupation in a
That's
genocide.
fair. That's
Yeah,
what's fair.
yes. And that's what they're going
Apartheid
to do
is
now.
apartheid.
That's what they're going to do. They're going to listen to us and then invite someone along to tell them why they should stay with the occupation.
Yeah,
So the fights on those are still going to happen.
yeah.
The fights on other issues are still going to happen. The Greens are the only people in a position in Hackney to take advantage of that electorally and for us to support. And there are two, like I say, two by-elections happening next month.
Mm.
Um,
But that won't be the same everywhere, will it?
yeah,
It won't be the same that the Greens will be
no,
the best alternative. I mean, for me, I'm saying to people, look at what's happening in your local area and vote for the alternative that looks like it's most likely to
yes.
actually do some dent into the Labour vote.
Yeah, I think be strategic. I agree.
Yeah,
And be strategic about organising with allies locally.
yeah.
And yeah, it's hard though because there isn't anything national and there's attempts to do national things and they're not working.
Mm.
Like there's been so many attempts over and over again. I mean, originally in the Labour Party, it was "Don't Leave, Organise," which was catering to a diminishing number of people. Then
Yeah,
outside of the Labour Party, you had so many attempts. Momentum's moved outside the Labour Party, but
mm.
again, an attempt to stave off the fact that they're losing members.
Yeah,
There was Jeremy Corbyn launching the Peace and Justice Project, which has no grassroots.
yeah,
There was the around the strike movement, there was Enough is Enough, which
yeah.
again had no grassroots. There's For the Many, but that seems to me not to have gone outside of the Corbyn left.
Mhm.
I don't feel like any national, there's Transform, which I think is the most um, thought through attempt to actually create a new left party, but it's
Okay.
not catching on. I
Yeah,
think people are so tired of electoral politics.
yeah,
In terms of like the work it takes to organise nationally, there are people moving to the Greens, but again, it's not really taken off yet.
yeah.
I'm clear to see whether they're in a position to really side with the left. I think they've got so many internal divisions themselves.
Sure.
So I think there's a lack of a national. I don't know how we deal with that. I don't know whether it matters for now.
No.
Maybe we just have to go local, see what happens, and then build
I
from there.
think I think we just have to hit them wherever we can, the them being the forces of oppression and inequality.
Yeah.
I can't say more than thank you very much. Don't know how anybody else is going to like it, but I've loved it.
I enjoyed it
We
too.
must
Thank
do
you.
this again.
Yeah, we should. Maybe we'll just like my channel. We can swap around. You can come on my channel. Yeah,
I'll
that's
do yours.
nice. Because I haven't
That'd be
done much
nice.
on my channel for ages. I need to start doing that
Yeah,
again.
do that. Do
Yeah.
that. That'd be nice. Okay, thanks, Heather.